Okay, well, the recording has started. And with that, again, I'd like to introduce Benjamin Asimovich of the Colorado Department of Transportation.
Excellent. Eric, can you see the presentation
Yes.
on your screen? Excellent. I want to make sure of that because Teams doesn't allow me to see it when I'm sharing. Benjamin Chimovich, I'm the Traffic Operations and Technology Manager at CDOT. And what that really means is I do a lot of the technology implementations, both internally and externally, that has to do with traffic and traffic operations. The other thing I do, many of you have worked with me on speed management, i.e. setting speeds on CDOT highways, and speed enforcement, speed safety cameras kind of fell into my lap right after the 2023 bill um, came out. So I am the speed safety camera program manager here at CDOT, responsible for helping the regions help you implement your corridors and also implementing enforcement on our roadways, uh, mainly in work zones and school zones first. Work zones going first this year and probably into 2026 before CDOT does any other rollouts. Today I'm going to talk to you about uh, Colorado Revised Statute 424110.5, specifically the updates in July 2024. That was the last modification of the bill. I'm going to give you a quick overview of our speed safety camera program on both sides that we manage. And then we'll talk about the local agency procedure, which is required by the statute that CDOT promulgate rules and have a easy to follow procedure for local agencies to implement uh, automated vehicle identification systems corridors on their US and state highways. And then I'll talk about the best practices and recommendations, both of our research nationally and our research with local agencies who have already implemented their corridors. First, let's talk terminology. You're going to hear me say speed safety cameras a lot. This is the federal language that's really aligns with what Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and uh, other national programs have used. AVIS is automated vehicle identification systems. That is what our law specifies as the technical term. And then AVI corridor, that is one of the 4 locations in Colorado where where CDOT, CSP, or any local agencies can implement speed safety cameras in Colorado. And that's going to be very specific because if you implement it outside of those, it's not legal by the statute. This is a quick overview. Now, this law is dense and prescriptive. Uh, one of the recommendations is to read this law as many times as possible and have a subject matter expert. I've read this law probably over 120 times now. I'm asked questions almost every day about this law for our program. But let's get into just a light overview. This law covers all sorts of automated vehicle identification systems, including speed enforcement, red light enforcement, and bus lane enforcement systems, but not toll lane systems. That's a different law that our CTIO group administers. It is a prescriptive law. And what that means, it has specific definitions about what AVIS is, where AVIS can be deployed, and how we both CDOT, the state, and local agencies have to process or have to work their programs to issue valid violations. This is important because if you have people like me who know the law, or people like lawyers who read laws for a living, they can easily look at the law, look at a program and say, these are not valid violations, and either get things dismissed or repeat their language and saying, hey, this doesn't add up. Uh, and it can go on the internet and get spread very quickly. Talking about bulletin boards like Reddit, where anyone can post anything and say, hey, XYZ city's not following the statute, and then it spreads like wildfire. So keep that in mind. The law also says we can deploy in 4 main areas: repair, maintenance, and construction zones that are properly marked by statute, school zones, also defined by statute, adjacent to municipal parks, and AVI corridors. And that is by resolution and ordinance only. What that means is the county or the city or town has to go in and pass a resolution and specifically designate what part of the roadway is an AVI corridor. We recommend mile markers to mile markers, and that is because we have armchair folks, armchair lawyers who get a ticket and they will go and take a wheel and go from your first sign to the camera and walk it. There have been some tickets dismissed for being 298 feet from the sign where it's 300 minimum. So you got to really keep those details in mind. And those are all prescribed in law. Our speed safety program is really focusing on positive reinforcement. We want people to slow down for safety. And our 4 safety areas are the safer kids, safer workers, safer drivers, and safer roadways. This really aligns with our safety programs and our state highway safety program. Sorry, Melody, I always get that acronym wrong. But this aligns with all of our programs for advancing safety. And this is what we're going to see probably in the next 4 weeks is our initial outreach, focusing on this program and focusing on telling drivers, hey, we don't want your money. We just want you to slow down and be safe. We're going to start in work zones first. You're probably going to see one work zone going out initially, and then we'll slowly spread out as our program matures. Now, this statute asks us to oversee both CDOT deployments and manage our vendor and our system. Also, it requires us to approve local agency deployments on state and US highways. There's about 150 cities and counties that we have to work with. So we wanted to make sure that we had a procedure to do it. Looks like my thing is a little out of order, but that's all right. For our program, we're contracting with our own vendor. We're not signing up local agencies to work with our vendors. We're not going to do procurements for local agencies, but that's all right. Our vendor is working with us on their contract, and we're making administrative rules to fill in any gaps and reinforce the state statute. As prescribed as the statute is, there are gaps in it. For instance, warning periods. It says we can have a 30-day warning period, and this goes for everybody, local agencies and us, but it doesn't say how long the warning period can go after the 30 days. It just says you have to have at least a 30-day warning. And that's why we really say for local agencies who want to deploy corridors, do your homework, read the law, pass an ordinance that fills in those gaps as well. For CDOT, our work zones are our #1 safety focus in 2025 and probably will be moving forward. We're currently evaluating pilot projects, and we'll look at more deployments once the program matures. Probably 2026 will be the first time we look at anything but work zones. Don't have a schedule for that yet. Local agency procedure, our second piece that we have to do. We have a local agency procedure. You can see it on the right here. It is imperative that local agencies reach out to their region traffic engineers and get this procedure because as of July 1st, 2024, all local agencies have to receive CDOT and CSP approval to establish an AVI corridor on state or US highways, not interstates. Interstates are reserved for CDOT and CSP only by statute. Also, unless there's some sort of formal MOU or maintenance agreement or equivalent agreement, and some local agencies do have that, any permanent signs or cameras require a region-issued special use permit to put in. Once those two things are in, those applications go to the appropriate region traffic engineer and they route them to CDOT headquarters and CSP for approval. It's about a 2 to 3 week process if your application is complete. but nothing can begin until the written approval is complete and the special use permit is issued. Because the law is so prescribed, when local agencies go out, okay, let's just get a vendor and go out there, those uh, those violations are not valid, and they can be picked apart pretty easily in court. So we really encourage local agencies to read the law, put in a program that is legal and follows all the rules in the law. We have quite a bit of local agency coordination as of last October. City and County of Denver, we've talked to you all about your planned corridors. Morrison has had a corridor in operation, but it's been offline for a while. Mountain View is paused, but they're now to have a corridor in approval. We've talked to Pueblo, Custer County, Boulder, City of Boulder, and the County of Boulder have a few planned corridors. Fort Collins has 2 approved corridors. I believe they're in operation or ramping up to operation. And then Longmont just talked to us about 2 corridors as well. So you see local agencies are really jumping in. They're starting to deploy corridors, pass ordinances, or plan corridors. And that for us is, hey, slow down, think about the corridors, and really think about how your programs are deployed. So, best practices and recommendations. Do your homework. This is, I think, the biggest thing. People are rushing out saying, hey, we can do this, getting a vendor and putting out a program. And sometimes their information is based on SB 23-200, which has been out of date. Actually, the Senate bill final language, some of it changed in the final law, and then it changed again. Quite a bit of it changed in the current CRS. So we asked local agencies read and reread 424110.5 as much as you can. I have 3 copies. One's my reading copy, one is my local agency copy, and one is my CDOT copy. And they're all tagged appropriately. So when I get a question, I can open right to the section and go, here's what it says. Are we complying? And that goes to establishing an in-house subject matter expert. I know many of us aren't lawyers. I'm an engineer. I didn't want to go to law school, but I've read and reread these law. I've also read and reread all the laws that are applicable in some way to this law, including the speed limit laws, how to change speed limits, those sort of laws that have an impact on whether you establish an AVI corridor or not. Managing public expectations and perceptions, this is so critical. Automated enforcement is unpopular. And yes, the only 2 ways that have been really shown to slow people down are enforcement or infrastructure. We still recommend being really strategic in how you deploy your AVI corridors and how you would deploy enforcement in those corridors. The more the public thinks this is a revenue generating issue and not a safety issue, the more negative the press is going to be. And we've had some of that already just in the 4 weeks since I presented to the Transportation Commission. So really have to manage those expectations and perceptions. Have realistic expectations about revenue and violations. A town reported, hey, we had tens of thousands of violations, and then they got all the way down to maybe 25% of those violations after 4 weeks, and the revenue started dropping. So you really have to have realistic expectations, especially with how many tickets aren't going to be paid, and then how many violations are going to come in after you do a warning period, and then after you do 3 to 4 weeks, how many violations are you going to have with the regular commuters, the regular users of the road and the corridor. Another one here that I haven't mentioned before is valid and appropriate speed limits. CDOT is happy to work with you on making sure those speed limits for your corridors on state and US highways are appropriate. We've looked at all those corridors that you saw on the previous page for the local agencies, and we've affirmed that the speed limits there are appropriate, and there is mostly compliance on those corridors. Some we found that do not have good compliance, and the speed limit may have been set lower with good intentions, but people aren't complying with it because the design of the roadway says, nope, we feel comfortable going faster. So ensure you have valid and appropriate speed limits. The automated enforcement will be far less unpopular and noticed if people feel comfortable going the speed that's being enforced. Requests for proposals are important. What does the local agency want? Okay, what is needed in a proposal? Our proposal took us about 4 months to fix up and get ready to go out to the public for proposals. And we made a lot of changes as we saw other people's requests for proposal, other states, other cities, and it can be a little bit of a Frankenstein where you get a new RFP from the city and go, okay, we have to pause this. This is a good piece. How do we make it fit? Once you get your contract and your vendor, management is key. I have a project manager dedicated to managing the contract and the vendor, even though I am very involved. Uh, they are there to make sure every task is checked every day. And also, quality control and quality assessment is also so critical. Not having good pictures and not having good quality data may lead to you having to scuttle your entire program for a local agency, and that's really tough. So you have to have good quality control, quality assessment in your contract. And then another thing to keep in mind is reporting is required by statute. Minimally, the annual revenue and the number of violations is required. We recommend reporting as much data as possible for transparency. The more data you have out there, the more people can go, oh, wow, yeah, crashes are down, fatalities are down, yeah, and violations are down, but safety is up. And that is how, say, Pennsylvania DOT has gotten awards for their program because they have shown statistically not only the amount of revenue and cost and the number of violations, but also the number of fatalities and severe accidents, severe crashes have been reduced in their work zones. And that is a big deal to how much money these programs actually cost. And that's all I have. What questions can I answer for you all?
All right, thank you, Ben. That was really helpful. Yes, open the floor. Anyone has any questions, please raise your hands and I will get you directed to Ben. So first up, Greg McKinnon.
Hello, Ben. You mentioned about the showing the reductions of work zone crashes. Have we got baseline figures for that, or is that kind of an initial thing that has to be done that in this first year it's going to set the baseline that then you can then mark against?
We do have some data already. Some of you have seen it. We have, CDOT has shown that in work zones across Colorado, fatalities and injuries are up this year. That is kind of our baseline. Uh, the issue with work zones is we're going to roll them out this year and people are unpredictable. So getting a baseline is probably won't happen until year two where we have more automated enforcement in work zones. I would say the baseline is the past 3 years of work zone data. And then as we deploy into more work zones, we'll start seeing the trend similarly go down. We hope to see that similarly go down as other states have seen. So we really use the baseline as the data we have now, and then we proceed to see what, as we deploy in a larger footprint, what happens then. So we won't see the impact probably until 26, 27, realistically.
Oh, so a follow-up.
Go ahead.
No, it's a totally different question this
Oh,
time.
different question. Great.
So I think I heard you say earlier in the presentation that there are other facets to the law about bike lane and bus lane encroachment or something to be able to enforce that too.
It's only bus lanes. So
Only bus
that
lanes.
was
Okay.
only bus lanes, and that's cameras on buses when they detect a car in their lane. So like the lanes going up Santa Fe where buses are only allowed during peak times, um, those or in dedicated BRT lanes, that would be where those are enforced. Bike lanes are not bike lane parking and those sort of violations are not included in the statute.
Okay, great. Looks like Rolf from City and County of Denver.
Yeah, hey Ben, great presentation. Appreciate it. In terms of the bus lane violations, do those have to be designated through ordinance, or are those considered part of that kind of the special areas like work zones or school zones, residential?
Those are not defined in those areas. Most of 42.4, 110.5 pertains mainly to the procedure for automated enforcement of speeds. There are some things in there for procedures for issuing automated enforcement violations, but it's mainly for speed enforcement and AVIS corridors. So there's nothing in the law that says how to uh, designate bus lanes uh, or how to designate the process for those.
Okay,
Um,
that's helpful. And my other question, if you don't mind, before Matt jumps in here, um, wondering if you could speak to your all's thoughts on due process. So after somebody gets a ticket, do you all have any guidance or best practices for municipalities in terms of if somebody fails to pay, what are
mhm.
some of the recourse steps with personally serving them and or um, sending possibly to even collections?
That is all prescribed in the law. And this is the very high level process. Warnings go out the first 30 days. You need to prescribe in your ordinance or your operating procedures whether after that 30 days does someone get a warning for their first offense or is it just violations from there on out. Then there are certain days you have to send out a violation within 30 days of the violation being detected. If you don't, it's an invalid violation. Then for that, you have when the register on the vehicle gets it, you have 45. They have 45 days to pay. You can't do anything until the 46th day. On the 46th day, and during that 45 days, they can either dispute it or they can request a hearing officer to dispute it, present evidence that the ticket is not valid. If they dispute it and they say, and their dispute is turned down, they can still request a hearing. So that's kind of a complicated process that you have to figure out. If they completely ignore the violation, on the 46th day, you can issue a civil assessment, which says, hey, you didn't show up, you didn't call, you didn't pay. There's now a civil assessment against you. You have another 30 days to pay this. If they don't pay the civil assessment, then a hearing officer can then go, okay, this is now a statement of or a notice of final liability. That then they have a certain amount of time to either appeal in the county courts or pay. And if and only if that is not paid, then within those 30 days, then you can take it to collections. So it's a very prescribed process. Um, and then it just kind of goes in that process. There's some other things in the bill and things that are not in that are gaps in that process that you really have to fill with your program or your process, like CDOT is doing with their administrative rules. That's the process. So you can't really go to collections until you step through it. It's really about see 70 about 100 120 days before you really can go to collections.
Okay, yeah, appreciate that, and also the nuance with some of the other contracts that somebody may have to have in terms of being able to personally serve somebody, and also
Yep.
collections contract to pursue that if that's what the jurisdiction chooses to do. But thank you.
And let me add on to that notice of final liability. That has to be personally served in some way, either by hand or by registered mail, that they sign that they've received it before you can go to collections.
Duly noted. Yep. Thanks.
It's a great question. Looks like Matt Duncan.
Good seeing you, sir. Hey, two questions for you. One, of the agencies, looks like a lot of them are in Region 4, but is there a minimum or maximum length of that enforcement zone? I'm assuming this is all like time distance, right? Like, can it be a zone that's 3 miles long? You mentioned parks. Is there any kind of criteria that lists that out?
For the first three, work zones, school zones, and municipal parks, we'll start with work zones and school zones. There's no minimum there except for the established zones in state law. Those are very specific on where those are. So if it starts at milepost, so a work zone starts at milepost 3.1 and it goes to 3.5, that's it. That's your
Okay,
work zone.
cool.
Same with school zones, at least on CDOT roads, those are anywhere from, I think, 2,500, 2,000 feet to, I think we have one that's about 1.5 miles long. Those were also established by engineering process and a law, and those are pretty solid.
Sweet.
For
Okay.
parks, it has to be adjacent to the park. So it has to be on the street there, right there on the park has to be next to it. So on that street, right by the cameras. So you can't really go, oh, the park's down the block. We're going to start it here. The enforcement has to be adjacent to the park. For AVI corridors, it's all or a segment of that roadway. Something to really think about there is, where are the mile markers of those specifically in your ordinance? Because you do have to put a sign 300 feet minimum before the corridor starts and 300 feet before every camera, specific to the law. So you're going to have people who are wheeling those distances to make sure you're in compliance and what the law says. So there's no specific distance for AVI corridors, but make sure that it's long enough that you can put the signs ahead of it, and a sign ahead of each camera, because people are going to sign to walk those corridors. And another thing to be conscientious of, if your corridor starts if you're putting your sign up 300 feet before the corridor and that's in another town or city, you got to talk to them as
Right.
well as CDOT. To follow up, someone said, is there a minimum? Is there a maximum? No, the law specifically says 300 feet minimum
Okay.
before each camera and the corridor begins.
Okay. So yeah, it sounds like on freeways, on-ramps could get tricky, because if you have your signage prior to an on-ramp. Okay. No, that everything you're saying makes a lot of sense. And then the last question, this is going to be from our police department. Is there anything that can escalate the citation? Like, let's say they're like a super speeder, like 40 over, or is it always going to be a parking ticket? Like, if we get like a front shot, face shot, like anything like that, or is that all completely pretty much against the law, like as you've pretty much read it?
There is a portion right at the beginning of the law that says nothing in this is applicable to 25 mile per hour and over,
Okay.
because of the speed limit law that says it's a class 2 misdemeanor, and a big fine and that sort of thing. And those by law have to be served by an officer. So if you, in your ordinance, can comply with that and use that data for complying with the other law that's 25 and up, yes, you can.
Okay.
Again, I'm not a lawyer. That's
Okay.
how CDOT is handling it. And we've been talking to the Attorney General. That's how we're going to handle it and give the option to law enforcement to get that data. if they're going 25 and over. But again, all cities should talk to their legal counsel and if not the AG, and figure out what's legal and what isn't. And if we come up with workings of that everyone wants to change, go, yeah, we really need to change those two laws. That's something we can look at in the 26th legislative session. But for right now, it's a gray area that has to be addressed by lawyers. How about that?
All right, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Matt. And looks like we have Alex Bolin, Town of Superior.
Sure, yeah, thanks for the presentation. It's timely for us. We're probably going to be implementing some sort of either red light or speed enforcement cameras on the Caslin Boulevard, probably this year. Town council is pretty. So we're thinking through some of these things, and then the previous question about collections had me thinking as well. You know, and if you don't know the answers, that's fine. This is just where my head's at. Is collections worthwhile in terms of time and money recovered? If it's not, do people catch on to the fact that they don't have to pay?
I mean, in the past, I don't know if collections are worth it because we have no experience in that yet. I know CTIO has gone from doing collections to doing the double white line penalties and making it putting a registration hold on those, which in other states seems more effective than collections. In the past, no one has had to pay these speeding violations, and so some people just don't pay. So it is a risk, and I will tell everyone here, speed management programs it's not really, there's two parts. There's the project management of it, and there's the risk management, and all these are risks. And you won't really know until you deploy your program what will happen, even based on other programs, because some of them differentiate a little bit, some of them differentiate a lot. So the quick and easy answer is I don't know if it's worth it as of now. It's to be determined with more data in the future.
Okay. That registration hold you mentioned, is that an automated process, or does one have to go through and work with the DMV on an individual basis? How does that work?
That is not allowed by state law at this time. What local agencies and CDOT can do is go to collections after we deliver the final order of liability. It is not an option for AVA systems at this time.
Okay.
So even if you did it and you put registration on hold, it would probably be challenged and thrown out.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
And that's just the risk of these prescribed laws. You have to be very careful and just read what the law says, and make sure that your gaps fill what those laws say in a way that is legal and is not arbitrary and capricious.
Cool. Thank you.
I have a question, Ben. But first, does anybody else have any questions?
I had one more in terms of
Okay,
that.
sure.
This kind of relates to the effort that CDOT has planned to communicate accurate information about this program and making sure that there's not like misinformation being sent out. And it really gets to the collections piece or holding accountability, because if people, know that, oh, no consequence, then this piece of paper that I'm sent doesn't really mean anything. Now, when they're sent the personal assessment, that's, another kind of flag, and maybe more people will pay after that. But even folks are like, it still doesn't matter. They're not going to boot my car. They're not going to hold registration. They're not like, there's nothing that they can really do unless they use the collections. And if that's still not a lever that cities are willing to do, and word, gets out, then it kind of undermines, I guess, accountability of this. But just wondering in terms of CDOT, how to maybe get the information out, if there's any kind of communication campaign you all are doing. I know you did a big effort with the hands-free law. It's great, but wondering about this. Yeah.
We are indeed doing something, and it's on this slide. This is our Slow Down for Safety campaign. We're bringing on a communications team to help us with that for the next 6 months into a year. And then also our communications team internal has put together a communications plan. So you're going to see a website pop up here in the next 4 to 6 weeks. You're going to see Blissway's informational, as soon as we have a contract signed, their informational page pop up, and we'll start initial rollout of, hey, this is coming. Here's our first corridor, and we're doing a pretty big media campaign to keep the right information in the right places, like we did with the hands-free law. So yes, that is definitely happening.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Ben.
Welcome.
All right, thanks, Rolf. Just one last question, Ben, before we kind of get into the end steps of the meeting. Is there any prescriptions in the current statute about where the funds go? Because some of the guidance I've seen from like Vision Zero Network, the document actually that Rolf has put in the chat, talks about ways to potentially use funds if there is revenue that's generated from this directly into like other traffic safety measures, as opposed to a general fund as ways to get community support and buy-in. Is there anything in the statute that would not allow a city or a county or whatever agency is looking to this to do that? Or is it open to just their council's discretion as when they draft their ordinance?
There is, that's something I haven't memorized in yet, so I'm looking, I would open it up and take a look for yourselves. I know CDOT is only allowed to use it for operational costs. So we can only use it up until we get to zero operational costs. So if our vendor costs $2 million a year, that is where our money is going to go. Now, the minute we make $2 million in $1, that $1 has to go to vulnerable road user projects only.
Okay.
I don't have the law open at the moment, but there it is. I would say read that, and again, it's going to be very important that every city has someone who is an expert on the law on where that is going to go. Now that I have it open. So for the state, we have to credit it to operations and to our state highway fund, and all we can do is do operations and to fund road safety projects for VRU.
Okay.
That is at the end of the law for us. And so I don't see anywhere else for the local agencies what they have to do the discretion. But I will say this: if anyone gets, if this money is going to anything else but operating an AVIS or going anywhere else but safety projects, you're going to have public folks who are not going to be happy about it. So again, manage your public perceptions and manage those expectations early on where that money is going to go.
Okay, great. Great. Well, thank you so much for the presentation, Ben, and thank you for all of the questions from the working group. I'm going to stop the recording